Now, about 2 or 3 years later, they were back where that hospital was. They were going on vacation. And he said to his son, hey, you want to go back to the hospital? That's where he was. And he says, no, but that's where the angel sang to me. And he began to talk to him about that. And he said, after he'd gone to heaven, he tells several things. He said, I didn't want to come back. I don't think I want to come back either if I go there, right? Anybody else? If you see it, well, if you get there. No, I hope you get there. But if you get to heaven, you're not going to want to come back. He said, he told his dad, right as they were going on this past this hospital, he said, Jesus said I had to come back. He told some other things. There was a lot of fun things in there. When the angels started to sing to him, he said, can you sing, you will rock me? And the angel said, no, we can't sing that one. And but he said, I didn't want to come back. And Jesus said, you have to come back. He said, I don't want to go back. He was just a child. I don't want to go back. And Jesus said, you have to go back. Why? Like a 3 or 4-year-old boy. He said, because of your daddy's prayer. And he said, the father said, that prayer that I prayed in that waiting room, that I cried out to God, he said, God heard that prayer. That was a prayer of desperation more than of faith. And he said, it was because of that prayer, God said, I don't understand all that. I don't understand all that. I just do know that you can get the portrait of God becomes extremely real when it seems like it's a checkmate story. But I just want to tell you, the king has one more move. Do you believe that? The king always has one more move. And when you are working everything through your own human grid system, and all you can see is your own human answers, God says, now wait a minute. He says, I can help you with that. I can start to pull the veil away. I can help you to see a miraculous God. I'm not going to be able to get through all these. God told Jehoshaphat, don't be defeated. The battle is not yours. Can you say that together with me? The battle isn't yours. Our grid system is reason striving. God's grid system is revelation rest. Our extremity becomes God's opportunity. We have to come to the end of our reason. We just seem to have to. We almost have to. Because if you've got another solution, if you've got another $100 bills in your pocket to solve the problem, you'll most likely do it. We just seem to have to come to situations where God has to be our only solutions. We are powerless against this situation, Jehoshaphat said. Powerless against it. There is no solution. But our eyes are turned on you. Do you remember that? Our eyes are turned on you. I just think until we get to that place, we will not see God. I don't know that I entirely believe that. You know, you're not supposed to question yourself while you're preaching. You know it's okay to talk to yourself? Did you know that? And it's okay to answer, too. That's all right. But if you hear yourself say to yourself, what'd you say? You're in trouble. The psychiatrist running 2-for-1 specials on schizophrenics down at the corner. I'm not so sure that we have to do that. But it's just a human experience. Wouldn't you agree? We just will go and go and go and go and go, and then we'll just get defeated and we'll give up. Until we get to those places, it doesn't seem like we can see God. And Jehoshaphat got to that place where he came to the end of his resources, 185,000 against 30. He said, we have no solution. He came to the end of himself, and he had to go talk to the preacher. And the preacher said, there's a God. I love preachers who are full of hope and faith and confidence. The seminary professor from Dallas Baptist Theological Seminary went to hear one of his preachers, and he said, after he was done, he said, I just wanted to know whether you had a big God or you had a little God. I like preachers who have big gods. And you got to come to the place maybe where you come to the preacher, and hopefully the preacher has a big God. And Jehoshaphat went to the preacher, Jehaziel, and the preacher was a big godder. He said, we have a great God, and he can give you the solution. Great story I recently read about Tommy Barnett. Took a little church in eastern Ohio. He was a great preacher. evangelist, young preacher in his early 20s. His daddy was a district superintendent. He gave him a church of about 70, and he thought, I should have had a church of 1,000. He thought he was more important than he really was. His dad said, son, take that church. You do something with that church. And he said, try to grow that church. And he was so discouraged and defeated, he couldn't make a move. He couldn't get out of there. It was just a small church. And he said, God began to show him the Syrophoenician woman. You remember the woman who came to Elisha and said her problem, her impossible situation? And they were going to take her to debtor's prison and take her kids from her at that time. And Elisha said, what do you have in your house? And she said, just got some old clay pots in my house. He said, go get the common. Go get the ordinary and bring them to me. It was in her house. And he said, God began to show him there's a miracle in his church. And I kind of believe this as a district superintendent. I kind of believe every church, if God begins to touch someone's life, there's a miracle in every house. I just kind of believe it. And he began to preach that there was a miracle in the house, and there was a miracle working God, and there was a God who could do the miraculous in his church and in his people. And one of the gals began to get it. And as she began to get it, she said, Pastor, I think I should start maybe seeing if I can do something about bringing people to Jesus. She didn't know what and didn't know how, but she said, can you help me? And she and her husband, Leon, began to take Friday nights and just visit some apartment complexes. And about 3 weeks later, she had a convert, quote convert, not yet converted. She had a guy down on his knees on his couch, and she called the preacher and said, I don't know what to do with him. And Tommy Barnett came over and he prayed, and the guy was powerfully converted. And he came to church the next day. He sat on the front row the next Sunday, and she began to run the little kind of a pickup ministry there where she'd pick up the people. She filled her car. She filled her husband's car. They did it twice. They started to fill the front row and the second row and the third row. Before long, they got a bus. And the bus that they'd got, he was able to get the board to help him to buy a bus, and then the motor burned out 3 weeks later. He got someone to fix the motor. And maybe you know the story of Tommy Barnett. He took that church to 4,000, but he said God taught him in his ministry, there's a miracle in every house. He said if you can just find that miracle. He was stymied, he was stopped, but he began to find the miracles in his house. Has the Church of the Nazarene come to the place where we've stopped believing in the miraculous and the transcendent God? We have so cerebralized it, we've kept our grid system of only that which we process through the Hebrew or the Greek, and all of a sudden we've left a transcendent God out of our ministries. The King, I want to tell you, he always has. Are you with me? One more move. It's not checkmate. And so when you come to the end of your resources, now I'll wrap this up real quick. I know you think I'm lost. God is never stymied. Do you believe that? And let me just tell you something. He's always got a creative plan. Part of the problem with the church is when we do something, it starts to become sacred. And then it becomes hallowed. And then it becomes legislated. And then you have to have it just like we always did it for 100 years. I dare you to go through the Bible and find the miracles of God and any two that are exactly alike. God is infinitely creative. He's always doing something on the stretch, always doing something on the new. That is new. And so here, look at this situation. 185,000, 30,000 troops. Jehoshaphat said, no, there's no answer. There's no solution. We have no solution to this. Jehaziel, the preacher, says, maybe God's got one more secret that he could help us with. Maybe one. Let's ask him. You know what I think sometimes we're afraid to ask him because we'll say, God, if you'll answer this little prayer, I promise you, I'll never ask you for another thing, right? And God says, I don't want you to do that. In Romans 1:17, he says, I want your faith to go from faith to faith to faith to faith to faith. If you asked God for a miracle last year, he wants you to ask for one 10 times greater this next year. That's the kind of God that you have. And so here's what God says. God tells Jehaziel, now tell Jehoshaphat, don't worry about this. I've got one more miracle, just one more left. I think I got one more. But he said, you know what I'm going to do this time? It's going to be infinitely creative. Now, get the picture. 185,000 troops, 30. And so you know what God says? Is there a worship team around here? Now, it's amazing what God's going to do with the worship team. Who was the worship team? Worship team, stand up, would you? Stand up, Pastor Brian. Would you come up here just for a minute? Now, I want you to, I know it. They're in trouble. I want you to just face the cross, okay? I want you to just face the cross. Now catch this. You're the people of Israel. Now catch this. And God says, I got a miracle. But he said, we're going to send the worship team out in front of the army. And they're going to be ahead of us. And they're just going to sing against. And now, who wants to join the worship team now? Anybody want to join the worship team now? Everybody wants to sing on the platform until there's 185,000 troops on the other side, right? And there's only 30,000 here. But God says, you know what this worship team's going to do? They're going to do what they do every Sunday morning. They're going to lead these people of God to believe that God is in charge. In Daniel 10:13, you know what it said? Daniel started to pray. And the scripture says we fight not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and rulers in high places. Here's what God says. God says this worship team's task on Sunday morning is to lead the people to realize that the battle that they are fighting is principalities and powers and rulers in high places. And so you actually enter into battle on a Sunday morning, and you help these people to wage war against that opposite force. And as you begin to sing about his holiness and about his righteousness and about his goodness and about his power, here is this army out here and goes, maybe God could help me Monday. Maybe God could help me Tuesday. Maybe God could be with me this week. After all, because those people helped me remove my grid system and have a new faith in God. Can we give the worship team a hand? Wouldn't you say that's creative of God? I wouldn't have thought of it. Would you? The exhaustless mind of God has hundreds of answers. I just need one of them. Let me give you the last one. It's overage. God's answers are always abundant. I think part of the problem with the Church of the Nazarene is that we don't see this incredible splashage of the miraculous. What I mean by that is that there is so much abundance that it just splashes all over everyone else around us. When God's answers come, they are not only abundant, they are super abundant. And there's a lot left over for people who are filled with his Spirit and with the touch of the miraculous, so that people around begin to say, what is that you got? What is that you've got? And you say, well, let me tell you about it. I went to a training seminar for 3 years. One of the speakers said that in the 50s we had these lilliness music. We used to be known as the dynamic singing church. And he said, you know what? We went over and said, what do you Nazarenes got going on? He said, we'd get some of your lilliness music, we'd put it in a brown paper bag, and we'd take it home with us and try to sing it in our churches. And I think, what was it about the dynamic of that church that just splashed all over everyone? You see, when Jesus came to Peter and he said, may I borrow your boat, go back out into the deep. And he went back out into the deep. He said, now put your nets on the other side. I think they probably had this little debate. And Peter said, Jesus, I'm the fisherman. You're the carpenter. I'll leave the carpentering to you. You leave the fishing to me. We fished all night. We didn't catch anything. And the water on this side is the same as the water on this side. He said, just do it, you idiot. Isn't that what Jesus says to you once in a while? That's my own self-talk. Sorry about that. He put his nets. He pulled them up. There were 153 fish. And they were so blessed by the abundance of God that they had to call their buddies over. And they called their buddies over. And their boat started to sink because they put the fish in there. And they said, stop! You're blessing us too much. That's what I call splashage. When God does a miracle, when the king has one more move, there is splashage from the work of God.